Hi, welcome to a Roboflow demo movie. In this movie I will show you how you can use Roboflow to keep track of a numbering system, setting counters to different record fields. In some cases you require for each new record to get an automatic number. This number can be very simple or very complex. And so Roboflow can help you with this process. Let's start with a simple example of what this workflow does, and then we'll have a look at the details. So I am going to catalog here 3 new files. I'm going to catalog this file, and I'm going to catalog, for instance, this file, and I'm going to catalog. Let's also do this JPEG, and then finally, as a final example, let's take this JPEG and do something, rename it so it starts with an A. You will understand later why I would be doing that. So I'm selecting this file. Don't mind the sirens. So if I look now at the files that I cataloged, please notice at this point notes field is empty, notes field is empty, notes field is empty. What have I configured in this cataloged? There is a trigger that listens to newly cataloged files, and there is a workflow that looks at those trigger files. So I just cataloged 4 files. So in my trigger folder I have 4 different trigger files, and it's these files that Roboflow will pick up. So when I run this workflow and I go to Cumulus and I go to my first record, I see that in the notes field there's a simple number, a 6-digit number with the number 2, which is the second PDF that I catalog with this process, with this Roboflow process monitoring new records. If I look at the next one, which is a GIF file, it gives me a number that prefixes with the year, and then a dash, and then an automatic number. I have a JPEG with no counter, so apparently I don't want anything to be counted for JPEGs. And then finally I have a file that starts where the file name starts with an A, and this has also triggered some kind of counter. These are just examples of the simplicity or complexity of these counter fields that can be assigned. How does this work? It's a hot collection workflow, which is in this case configured to look at a trigger folder, and on top of these triggered files, which can be new files or field value changed, it will automatically perform an additional query, making sure that the record field, the record name, has a value. This is just done because I'm basing my logic of these triggers, as an example, on that particular field, so it has to have a value, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And then in this workflow I configured a counter parameter file. This parameter file, when I edit it, contains a setup which looks maybe a little bit complicated, but I will explain in a minute. So what do I configure here? I created a tab limited text file with 5 columns, and each of these columns have a special meaning. The first one I defined a regular expression, which will be evaluated against the condition value. And the condition value, I pick up the record name. So this condition says I'm looking for a piece of text, which is in this case the record name, that starts with an A, either a capital A or a lowercase a. And then dot star means in regular expression any character. I've configured a parameter file which I called a-counter, a-counter.txt, which I stored in my parameter file. And then I defined the field that I want to set. And then finally, I defined the value I wanted to set. What this workflow does is it looks at the counter file, and for the counter file, it picks up a new number and stores it in an internal variable called new number. That's how I pick up this value here. So we saw that the file that starts with an A had a number, a result as A minus 1, because it was the first record with that name that I was cataloging. If I catalog a second file starting with an A, and so let's do Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V. So I have a second file now that starts with an A. If I catalog this file, again, the Roboflow workflow will be running normally on a time-based schedule, let's say every minute or every whatever you want. At this point there's nothing, but if I run the workflow, let's run the workflow, it will have as a number A2. And it tells you that in the logging, of course, of the workflow itself. It says I find one record, this is the name, and the field I'm setting is the notes field, can be any field of course, and then I'm setting it to A2. And if I look in Cumulus, I can see that now the value is A2. Very often with automatic numbers, you don't want the number to be just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you want it to have a certain number of digits. And so this 2 is of course very easy to configure. You have in Roboflow something called number format, and then you can specify the formatting of that number. So that was the example of the PDF file that I did, where it was giving me for the PDF file, let's go to this PDF file, there it is, 6 digits and then the number. So that's what we configured here on this PDF line. I said a number format for that new number. And then it can get even more interesting if you, for instance, catalog a PNG. I didn't, but you can pick up other field values. So in this example, I'm adding that new number, and I'm also adding the record ID as a value. Could be any field or any combination of fields that you're adding. That too, putting it in a number format, for instance, of 6 digits. So as a final example, you noticed that the GIF file that I cataloged was actually having the year in front of it. So you can have a counter that not only contains the year, which is of course pretty easy to add by just adding the date format, but it restarts the counter per year, because in the name of the file of the counter where I keep track of which number we wanted to add, that that particular number is also, or that particular file name is also containing the year. So on January 1st next year, it will not be 2018, but it will be 2019. Because that counter file at that point won't exist, it will start with number 1 again, and so you can create an automatic number. So you can see it's very easy to create a number system if you just have a number system where you just need one counter. Then you don't need this complex setup with multiple options, but then you just need a simple counter. But this is an example of having different kind of counters with different kind of formats. And so Roboflow can very easily take care of that for you. You can even add a little parameter file where you go in and add these parameter files, counter files. So this is PDF, param is not the correct word, it's PDF counter that I used in that parameter file. So you can even say, okay, but at this point we are already not at number 2, but we are already at number 456. So if I go in here and I say okay, then now this is saved. And if I go to Cumulus and I catalog a new PDF, because this was the PDF counter, then for the PDF counter I'm going here and I'll just duplicate the file. So now I have a copy of that file. I catalog it. Let's have a look. This is the last file. There's nothing yet here, of course, but when the Roboflow workflow behind the scenes picks up this new counter, this new record being created, it executes, and now here's 457. So in the counter file is always the last number used, and so with each new step of the workflow, this is then the next number, and automatically if we go and have a look in our counter file, we can see that this counter file has now 457. And if I want to look in the GIF counter file, which had the year attached to it, then I would have to do it like this. I'm not sure about the dash here, so it could be we end up with an empty file. Yeah, no, it was without the dash apparently. So then it could be, and maybe the counter file was called like this. And yes, you could see this was the counter file that is used for GIFs in that parameter file. So very simple, very straightforward, very easy to configure, and you can have as many counters based on whatever logic you want. It can even contain the catalog name. So you could say for this catalog name I'm using this counter, for that catalog name using a different counter. All this is just a question of setting it up. So I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. It's peter@goforflow.be. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.